We the people tell the government what to do. It doesn't tell us. We the people are the driver. The government is the car. And we decide where it should go and by what route and how fast. Almost all the world's constitutions are documents in which governments tell the people what their privileges are. Our Constitution is a document in which we the people tell the government what it is allowed to do. We the people are free. And I hope we have once again reminded people that man is not free unless government is limited. There's a clear cause and effect here that is as neat and predictable as a law of physics. As government expands, liberty contracts. We the people tell the government.
The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the individual speakers and do not necessarily reflect the views of the host, producers, or any affiliated organization. This podcast may include sensitive discussion related to topics such as child protection, abuse, and criminal behavior. The content is intended for informational, educational, and awareness purposes only, does not constitute legal, medical, or professional advice. Any reference to individuals, cases, or events are based on personal perspective, professional experience, or publicly available information and should not be interpreted as statements of fact regarding any specific person or situation. The host, speakers, and producers disclaim any liability for actions taken by listeners based on the content of this podcast. Listeners are encouraged to seek qualified professional guidance for their specific circumstances. Listeners' discretion is advised. All individuals are presumed innocent unless proven guilty in a court of law. There we are. Hey, everybody. Welcome to Candid Conversation. How is everybody?
Hey, good. How are you?
Good. I don't think the last of that disclaimer played. I think it stopped it with like 53 seconds left. I tried to let it do its thing, but in the end, I'll try to play it again if we get too out of hand. So, everybody, welcome Dr. Melissa Maranville, and she's with Frontline Justice, and we are doing another candid conversation with her, and we always enjoy when she comes on. I think we're going to do this one a little shorter. You said you wanted to condense them a little bit and pack us full of information, wow us, and make us ask some questions.
I don't know if I'm going to wow you, but I don't know. I think the last time I thought it was excellent. It was over 2 hours, which I thought was fantastic. So we can definitely go back and get some good information on that one. But I thought this time maybe we would focus more on some of the issues and focus more on like the state of Tennessee, particularly, Blount County, Maranville, Tennessee, that kind of thing.
Sweet. Works for me. What about you, Robert? I didn't even ask you how you was doing today.
Oh, I'm doing good, man. I'm here for Melissa.
Hey, I have a cheerleader. That's awesome.
That's yeah. Okay, so I don't, let's let you get going, and then that way it'll generate a question from us because most of the time we're just like.
Well, again, I don't mean to do the PTSD thing, but it does kind of come with territory when the shock and awe and the PTSD. So I always give a warning of that, because my content is kind of harsh. I was speaking with a really good friend of mine earlier, and we were talking about, because he's in the same area, and we share like a task force kind of thing. But anyway, we're talking about how. The topic got up, just a little icebreaker, got on dating, right? And, So talking about going out on dates, and people are like, "Oh, so what do you do for a living?" And I share, what I do for a living, and usually they usually say something like, "Oh, that's so cool," and then you never hear from them again. So in essence, that's what it's like. Yeah, it's cool, and they usually come along with something. I'm so glad there's people like you. And then more.
Oh man, yeah. Never had that approach either, I might
Yeah.
have done the same thing. I'm getting out of here, yeah.
Well, it's a sensitive topic. So unless you're with your friends and that live and work in this area, we all get it, and that's about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
So
funny.
anyway, yeah. Sometimes we try to find a little bit of humor in our work and what we do. If not, it could be brutally mentally. That is.
I'm sure.
Well, one of the things, like I said, I wanted to kind of focus on, and I'll kind of get us started. I wanted to talk about how what a problem this is, and kind of give a little bit of ideas, a little bit of numbers and stats. So if we look at the problem of child sex abuse and child sex abuse and child exploitation, kind of also will cross over into other things like human trafficking and that sort of thing. But just to give you an idea, nationally, 1 in 10 children will be sexually abused, and that's just a reality. So if you think of a classroom of say 30 students, on average, by looking at the stats, that means 3 of those children in that room will be a victim of sexual abuse at some point. And in Tennessee, what we're seeing is tens of thousands of cases reported every year, just in the state of Tennessee alone. And with many more of these, they're often never even disclosed. And most children will not disclose child sexual abuse until they get, much older, sometimes not even in their 20s. It's normally when they're getting older, maybe in their 30s, and they're starting to see the impact of what the abuse had on their younger lives. Maybe in their 20s, they were abusing alcohol, drugs, acting out, being arrested, in and out of the systems and things like that. And so that's a lot of what we also see. In most cases, just a little bit of recap on the last time, the offender is someone the child knows and trusts. 99.99% of these cases. So it's someone within an adult's immediate circle. So when we combine that with like grooming and plea deals and gaps in monitoring, we're not just responding to crime, we're often missing patterns that often allow these cases to continue.
Right. What did you call that? Did you say a pleado? Is that what you said?
Plea deals.
Oh, plea deals. Yeah.
Yeah. I want to talk about plea deals also in this recording session today.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
yeah, and plea deals, because plea deals is a major issue, and it's a gap within the system, right? It's a systemic issue. A lot of my work surrounds on the systems that allow this abuse to take place, like school systems, churches, our own criminal justice system with plea deals.
I was going to say legislation because
Yeah.
when I brought it to someone within the commission, they said that they could do this, but beyond that, it was a legislative thing to put on harsher penalties. Maybe is that the right way to say that?
Yeah, harsher penalties, but the laws have to be changed in order to be able to modify those penalties that a prosecutor or a judge can even pass down. So it's an entire systemic issue.
Right.
And plea deals is one of those issues that I want to get into.
So the plea deal thing, that's amazing because our county for sure has been a part of just exactly what you're talking about. And so I'm of the opinion that when these things are coming through, there's 2 problems. One, it's the DA, and 2, it's the judge that's overseeing the case because they're allowing that to happen. Are you okay?
Yeah, I lost my screen went away for some reason. It
Oh,
shut
okay.
down. Yeah, I'm not sure what
Okay.
happened. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Okay. So those are things that we can fix. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
That don't seem like it would be very hard to fix either.
Yeah, no, definitely those are things that we can fix, but it takes a process, right?
Yeah.
Like tomorrow, at from 1:30 to 3:30 or 1 to 4 at the Blount County Library. We're going to be talking about these topics, and Jeff Coggin goes by Cog. He's actually going to be talking about the laws, some of the laws that needs to be changed, and what is it that we need to do about this? What is his approach on how he's going to actually tackle these problems? And then I'm going to be discussing the plea deal issues, right, that we're seeing within the state of Tennessee, and how those plea deals actually enable these offenders to kind of fly under the radar, so to speak. Yes. Because if an offender avoids being on the sex offender registry due to a plea deal that's been made, and they do not have to be on that sex offender registry, in essence, the public's not going to know that my neighbor is an actual registered child sex offender. They're not going to know that. And it enables them to, like I said, fly under this radar. And it's a major issue. It's a major problem. And when these sex offenders get slaps on the wrist, so to speak, it just enables them to continue their abuse behind closed doors.
Yeah. Yep. I don't know what to say about that other than I want to blame certain institutions for that. You know what I mean? Where they allow those things to fly under the radar. So
I think it's a collective effort, because you got you got the sheriff's office doing the charges, you got the DA, judges. I think they were judges in one case. It's a mix of all of that for sure.
So how do we find accountability within the system? Because the show, we talk about system accountability and then child abuse or child sexual abuse. So for sure, what can we do? Or do you have, is that a question maybe that I should ask Cog?
Well, what can I do? What
Not
I
you
can
necessarily, but us collectively, yeah.
Well, continue to do what we're doing. For one, raise awareness, raising awareness. Peaceful protest, speaking publicly on these issues, keeping it going. What they're hoping is that we continue to jump on another topic and we don't continue to talk about these. And by keeping that constantly going and trying to hold them accountable as a community, well, in essence, place pressure on them in order to change the way they handle these cases. Because when we see cases that are frequently resolved through plea deal agreements, that causes an issue, right? Charges oftentimes may even be reduced to be able to secure conviction. So when they reduce the charges to secure a conviction, you'll hear them say, well, something's better than nothing, right? But when we reduce these charges to secure a conviction, and then when that happens, they avoid trials. So therefore, the public often doesn't know a lot about what's happening when they're avoiding these trial hearings, when it turns into like a bench hearing and not a trial to where it's really open to the public, when a grand jury avoids not being able to come in and hear a case, because when that happens, then it draws more attention to the cases.
Right. Yep.
So they're avoiding a lot of that. And then they're also avoiding accountability by not being required to even testify. So when these plea deals occur, plea deals are often used to guarantee a conviction, but it doesn't really fulfill accountability.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Yeah. And so then it ultimately causes more issues. It causes more like systemic gaps that we're seeing. We see reduced charges and lighter sentences. We see lighter sentencing. And then what that equals to is like less supervision. And then we see less supervision. And what that equals to is higher long-term risk. And then higher long-term risk, basically, in essence, results in more children being offended.
Yeah. Sometimes when I look at what's going on within our system, that I think it's a little bit backwards. Some of these things are happening to people that probably should have the opportunity to plea deal on lesser charges, nothing sexual related to a child. And then we see these type of issues that happen to a child. And like you said, it just as quiet as they can be about some, because they don't want this in the limelight. I don't think they want the public They don't want the newspapers to know. They obviously don't want social media, talking about it, that kind of thing. They want to try to keep it under there. So it makes me wonder if some of this might be even by design, just for that very reason, so that it is kept under the radar, so to speak, and not so much out there front and center. So
kind of makes me wonder about the parents too. You figure out of I guess 80 children over 20 years, you really don't hear none of the parents speaking out, which I would think would be a thing. I'd be super mad over that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah, I know exactly what you mean. When it comes to these children in the classrooms, and when they make reports to the school, I guess the office or whoever they're supposed to make a report to in the school systems, when something happens, we also have to realize that these children have been groomed over a long period of time. So when this occurs and you do have a child who does file a complaint within the school systems, and the school systems will oftentimes try to settle that within the school system because they don't want it getting out publicly, right?
Yeah.
And so oftentimes we may even see, non-disclosure agreements being signed. They may have, backroom deals taking place, that sort of thing. So when a family will say make an agreement behind closed doors with attorneys, et cetera, they'll sign a non-disclosure agreement or an NDA, and then therefore they can't talk about it after that point. They've settled, they've done a settlement, and say if it's a school teacher, that school teacher is then moved to another school in order to reduce the heat. But for a sex offender, that's just another location for them to prey on more children. Yeah. And then you'll see this cycle constantly repeating itself. As a parent, if I had ever experienced something like that as a parent with a child, the world would know about it. Right. No NDA would be signed. Yeah. The world would know about it, because one of the things they don't want is parents speaking up. They don't want parents coming forth. They don't want parents speaking publicly. But in essence, that doesn't protect children. That protects the predators.
And it's odd to me too, because if you go into the schools and you look, whether it's at a middle school, public school, high school, college, they promote that, no means no, consent, this, that, and the other, and they push it pamphlet wise and stuff like that. And then when something happens, then it's kind of, well, how can we handle this where it doesn't become public?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
I think the no, I'm seeing more and more to where we are moving away from the no means no. Yes, no means no. And we need to teach our children how to voice no, how to say no, and be confident with saying no. But what goes along with grooming is they are groomed into that over a slow process. And so when the grooming takes place over a long period of time, children don't realize what's happening to them, in essence, until they're much older.
Yeah, it kind of becomes part of what they think is regular, normal life. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. They're like, oh, my teacher wouldn't do that. They didn't mean that. That's not what that meant. I'm you'll hear children say, well, I was special. I was their very special student, kind of.
And children are just so easy manipulated, They don't know any better.
Yeah, they don't know any better. And especially if the offender, the predator, is targeting a child that comes from a troubled family, and and all families have problems, don't get me wrong, but they'll oftentimes know the children that are more gullible, more neglected at home. So therefore, if the teacher ends up showing that student more attention, that student is more drawn to that teacher. They're filling that gap
Yeah.
that the child actually should be getting from home, right?
Yeah.
You know, when it,
taking advantage of that.
oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we have, you know, these offenders oftentimes will hide in our school systems, you know, through these different types of, say, positions of trust, like coaches, aides, volunteers that come to the school, even older students. Older students are also taught to groom younger students,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So these daily access to these children within these schools don't raise awareness because or suspicion because it's their job. You know, and authority roles often also end up discouraging kids from speaking up. They are taught in school you don't speak against your teacher.
Right.
You don't say no to your teacher. You don't say no to your authority figures. So we end up seeing these individuals with these roles of trust taking advantage of just that mere simple fact.
So a perfect example is my parents raised us to question stuff. Okay, so even when we went to school, sometimes we were wrong and they knew it, and when we were wrong, they adjusted that accordingly. But when we were right, they were right there with us. And I had an incident where I had a hole in my jeans, and the principal was, or the assistant principal was mad at me for that, and it got to a point where when my parents came in over, it was a question thing. They didn't like that one bit, that the fact that my parents, under respect, was given the opportunity to question just exactly on a way smaller detail, not even any type of, inappropriate touching or any type of thing like that. I can't imagine, but not all parents do that. There's also homes I heard where just like you said, where if the child or if the teacher said it or the principal said it or the coach said it or a figure that was of authority said it, then it must have been right. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree with you. And, one of the things about grooming, and I love the fact that you were raised to say no. I did the same thing, with my children, raising them. It's okay to say no.
Yeah.
It's okay to say no. I want them to be confident in saying no. I think parents today should be raising their children to say no. I don't like this. No, I don't have to do this. The one thing I want to say about grooming is that grooming doesn't look dangerous. It doesn't look dangerous. Grooming looks helpful. And so a lot of times these kids, they think that they're just being helped when in essence they're being groomed, but they don't know what grooming looks like. I think it's far past time that, we should be discussing more and more and more in our communities about grooming and what does grooming look like.
Right.
So keep in mind, grooming looks helpful.
And a lot of times it's people that you trust.
Absolutely. It is people you trust. And then you grow to learn that you can protect this person, rely on this person. And then before you know it, this person has already worked their way into your family to gain access to your children.
Yeah.
Et cetera. So, it often goes undetected because kids fear, one, getting into trouble or not being believed. No one's going to believe me. Staff in schools may also misinterpret behaviors as normal. Adults are also groomed right along with kids, right? And we also know that the reputation of the adult also protects them. This person, for example, this person has been an upstanding adult community leader for years in our community. How dare you accuse them of such an action? I absolutely don't believe that. And you'll hear them say that. I don't believe what you're telling me. And then it's placed on the victim to prove that they have been abused for years. And another thing with that being said, a sexual assault victim, it's very, very hard to prove that you have been sexually abused because it doesn't leave external scars. It doesn't leave all of the trauma and the damage that it does to your body. If I saw this picture once, and I may have shared it on my Frontline of Justice page. I'd have to go back and look for it. It was a really good one because if you could see what the trauma, the internal trauma that this child sexual abuse and exploitation causes on an individual, they would be covered with external scars and external damage. They would almost look as though they weren't human over time. But because we can't see those external scars, we oftentimes as a society, or let's just say not me, but a society oftentimes does not believe a victim. And it's really hard for them to prove that.
So I'll say this, I've been groomed to believe just what you just said right there. Every time I hear about some sort of child or sexual case and it's high profile, I automatically believe the person that did it is not telling the truth.
Yeah. Why is that?
It's because most of the time I think they're looking for financial gain. Now, over time, the truth really comes to the top when it's real. And when it's not real, then you find that it washes away, and you sort of hear something later down the road where someone was actually paid out or whatever. But I have been groomed through the television to believe that if it's a high profile individual and someone comes forward with something, then they're wrong most of the time. So
Yeah. And especially if they are a very strong and powerful leader, right?
yeah.
Yeah. But one of the things you can do with those cases is follow the history. Look at the history and the patterns of behavior over the years, right? How often does this person stay if they are a celebrity or a politician or whatever that may be? How oftentimes do you hear them being in the media of being accused of such a crime? And how many behind the scenes court hearings has there truly been? And how many non-disclosure agreements has been signed in order for that victim to not come forward? Therefore, there's private settlements that take place for this to, not hit the open, the public, right? News media, etc. So you can look at someone's past behaviors and accusations, and you can almost see that these victims are telling the truth, but there's victims that are taking payouts because there is no hard, concrete evidence, et cetera, but they're willing to pay millions of dollars of settlements or even thousands of dollars of settlements.
Which is proof in our Congress and Senate because was it last week they again passed whatever ethics resolution to not disclose any of the payout or NDAs of any of these sexual accusations, let's say, if, just to be correct, I guess. And none of us will know. We don't know what's going on, up there, in DC like that. So
We'll never know.
No, we won't ever know. You're right, unless a hacker discloses it all.
right.
But other than that, we won't ever know. But I will tell you, just from my over 30 years being in this field, much longer than that, I'm just stuck on the term 30 at this stage. But well over 30 years, I will tell you that by the time a case reaches prosecution, for example, the pattern has often been happening for years and years, compared to the time a case will actually reach the level of a prosecution. Think about that. So I think I said in our last podcast that a sex offender, a pedophile in particular, will have hundreds of victims under their belt before they are ever caught. Yeah. And we know that. We know that from court data. We know that from facts, et cetera. We know that.
That's amazing. And then here's the other thing. When you was talking about grooming in the system, when they get some of these people to buy into it, like you said, they actually become part of the what's the right way to say it? So they are a victim in the beginning, and then they are part of the problem later. You know what I'm saying? And so they become financially. They get financial gain from it once they become of age or whatever, and then when something happens, well, then what we have in the system is that, well, yes, they were a victim, but now they're part of the problem. How do we go about correcting that? And then again, the NDAs and everything else that come along, and we don't ever get the whole story.
It's just a big old mess, ain't it?
Yeah.
What do you mean? Like if
So, for example, there's cases out there right now where the victim was a young girl, but when she became of age, she had the opportunity to say something, do something, and report it. She just continued to do what she had been doing, as a minor, but now she's being paid to do it, and so she's gaining from it financially. And so when it went to court, they tried to use them as a victim, but on the defense side of things, they showed where they were actually part of the problem, where they were trying to get young girls to come in and also be a part of what they were doing. You know what I mean?
are you talking about like someone who abuses and exploits a child, and then that child, when they become of age, they're also abusing and exploiting other children, or bring them up
Exactly.
to that
Yeah.
same ring?
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. These, and then with the cases, are you saying that they're wanting to try to use their past behavior as a reason for their criminal behavior?
So what happens is they're not allowed to use the victim part of their story as evidence against the individual because they became part of the um, um, crime when they had the opportunity to step away. Does that make sense? So they were a victim in the beginning, um, but they were paid as a victim. I don't know. The Epstein case, I guess, is basically where I'm going with it. Some of the things that he did in those cases where he used those women early in life to do the things that he got when they became adults in life, they were
Okay.
part of his scheme then. And so then when they all went to court, they were victims on one side of it, but they were also criminals on the other side of it. And there was no real way for them to be able to tell their story, their experience. I guess what I was trying to say was I think some of these people got trapped into that, and then they were a victim in the beginning, and then they were actual criminal in the end. So they were forced to be quiet, and they probably accepted money along the way too.
I remember one of, and it's public, so we can talk about that case.
Okay.
Virginia Gouffre, I believe she spoke about in her book, actually, when I was reading her book, that she actually recruited victims for Epstein to abuse. And she talked about in her book the guilt of how, obviously, she was never held criminally accountable for that, but she did speak about it in her book and how she was used to recruit other victims to bring in the Epstein circle, so to
Yep.
speak. Yeah.
So that's kind of what I was saying. She was groomed.
Yeah.
She was a victim, groomed, and then she carried on. So when some of these things, when I've read through some of the court documents, when they've tried to use these people to help their case, the defense found a way to make sure that that didn't happen based on the fact of how you said it so much better than I could. So,
It's okay. Again, I've been in it for like a long, long time, the field. So, well, I know, like, I don't know, I think the legal reality is that, past abuse is not a legal defense for committing abuse. But I know that the courts focus on the actions of the defendant, right?
yeah.
Like just what you just said, you were aware you were committing a crime, you were aware what you were doing was criminal, but you did it anyway. And I think also we have to look at intent. So within our court system, so what was the intent? The intent and the conduct, not the past victimization. And I think our courts tend to focus on that. But I will say that with human trafficking victims, there's more and more human trafficking victims now able to get their prior sentences expunged, right? Even felons. Like if a human trafficking victim has been charged with a felony, they are now able to go back and prove that they were coerced, they were forced, and because of that forcing, they are able to get their prior records expunged. That is something that is now happening within our community. So I want to say that the courts are now recognizing more and more where these used to be victims, but then they were committing these crimes. Actually, it was through force, and coercion, the control that happens behind trafficking, as to why they committed their crimes, and now they can get those cases expunged. What I'm not seeing more is within these cases of child sexual abuse and exploitation as a young child. I think with the child sexual abuse, there's so many people that don't talk about it. And I think they don't talk about it because they were groomed as children in their family units to not talk about it. It's a family secret. It's something we don't talk about. We don't want to damage our family reputation. We don't want to be held, we don't want people to see us like that as a family. But the longer we keep it's silent and the longer we don't talk about it, the more and more and more it's beneficial to the offender and the predator, because they thrive on secrets and they thrive on silence. And that's what keeps them committing these abuses and these atrocities. So ultimately, the more we begin to expose these sex predators, the more we begin to hold them accountable, right? And I think that's where we have to start as a community. Even in looking at rural Tennessee, I grew up in these areas. I know what it's like to grow up in these areas. We live in a Bible Belt as well too. So we have been groomed from a very young age that we don't talk about, domestic violence that happens behind closed doors. We don't talk about child sexual abuse that happens behind closed doors. We turn a blind eye to those things, or used to. But in our community, growing up, especially in rural areas like even Appalachia, right? We don't talk about those things, and we're not supposed to, because it's a secret. It's a family issue. It's a family problem. We don't, air our dirty laundry, so to speak. And I think one of the things that I try to do is raise awareness on this problem, because what parents also don't understand, particularly mothers and other adults within the family units, is they were also groomed. It's not their fault. It's not if a father is, or an uncle or someone is abusing their child, it's not the rest of the family's fault. They were also groomed to believe these things and to turn a blind eye to that. But in reality, they were also abused right along with everyone else.
Right.
And so I think by trying to bring that into the limelight and the awareness, that's one of the things I work really hard on doing, is trying to get it across to everyone that these families were also victims. Other members were also victims. They just weren't victimized in the same way. They were victimized and having to carry the guilt for the rest of their lives that they did turn a blind eye, or they didn't do anything when they should have, or they should have spoke up. They should have spoke up against the pastor in their church, or whoever that may have been, right? The school teacher at their school. They should have spoke up, and then they carry this guilt, and then they have this shame. So then they have that on top of everything else. So one of the things I try to do is get the point across that you were a victim too.
Huh. It's a web, ain't it?
Yeah, it really is. It's a web. It's a tangled web that we've all been a part of. But it's past time that we need to start talking about it. We need to start raising awareness. We need to have people to understand that it will not stop until we actually expose these predators.
Very true. You got anything to add, Robert?
Sorry, I get on my little tangents there,
No,
and I get kind of deep, but it is the truth, right? So
no,
Yeah,
it's good. Yeah,
I think she's absolutely right. You know, we got to keep talking about this. We got to keep bringing those names up,
yep,
and you know, eventually accountability will come in, but
yeah.
it's going to take more of this, definitely.
Absolutely, it is. And just to continue talking about it, if anything, talking about cases that are public and they're safe to talk about, having conversations about that, connecting it back to our communities and saying, we've had enough. I know I have. I've had enough. I've had enough hearing about how these teachers and these church leaders have abused their positions of power and trust in abusing children. I've heard enough about it, and I'm just so done with it. That's why I continue to share, and that's why I continue to post, and that's why I continue to even use myself as an example, because I'm a survivor of all of that. And so by me coming forward, what I hope is that I will encourage other people to come forward.
yeah,
And it's okay to talk about it. It's okay. I don't, I can remember years ago when I was terrified and I was afraid of being judged. I was afraid of what people would think of me and whatnot. And now I've had so many people come forward and say me too. And I want to jump on your bandwagon, Melissa. I want to help you. What is it that we need to do to make this happen in our community? Because like I said, we're in a rural community. We're in a very rural space. And just continuing to talk about it, I think will hopefully encourage others to come through. And when we all start doing that, that's when it's going to put pressure on the legal systems. That's when it's going to put pressure on law enforcement. That's when it's going to put pressure on our justice system and our judges and whatnot, and be able to hold them accountable finally. Yeah.
and I think it's happening more and more here, at least in the county that I live in. You know what I mean? Where there's enough people. It's a talk around the town, no matter who, where, how, whatever. Grocery store, commission meetings, doesn't matter. You know what I mean? There's someone saying something about what's going on. So um, it's definitely opened up some eyes. And it stinks because what had to happen for the community to see, finally what's really going on before they finally ask that question.
Yeah. 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 I mean, I agree. And even though we're in Maryville City, unless there, how many people don't ever leave Maryville and how many people don't travel the nation or the globe or the world and see how other societies, how other cultures live. And when you're in this little fishbowl like that, they just kind of keep going with the flow because they've all been groomed. We've all been groomed. Unless we break out of our comfort zone, we are stuck in this fishbowl of these ideas and ideologies and beliefs and things that we tend to live by, right? Yeah. And it's not until we start expanding our horizons, even it's just through social media, right? Getting on board, reading, listening. This is going to continue to happen because in rural communities, the challenge isn't just crime. The challenge is excess. The challenge is trust, and the challenge is silence. That's what we're really combating here. A crime isn't a crime, right, until it breaks a statute. But we naturally have, tendencies to trust, and we have tendencies, to, like I said, to trust those community leaders and think that they would never do something like that. But in reality, they do.
Huh. It's wild. Yeah.
Even anonymous reporting, I think if we could create something to where there's an anonymous reporting, not just to like NECMAC to their anonymous tip lines when it comes to content, but some way to anonymously report what's happening in our communities, because there's so many people, again, they live by that silence, by not speaking up. And I think if we had a way to anonymously report and it not be to the sheriff's department, and I'm not saying don't do that, please don't take that the wrong way, but I think that a lot of people, they think that if they even anonymously report something to DHS or the sheriff's department, some government agency, then ultimately, they can be traced and tracked. They'll learn who I am. that sort of thing as well too. So I think we need to be more creative and more clever in creating some sort of system to where people can just make anonymous reports.
That's a good idea.
Yeah,
So the state of Tennessee is like a mandatory reporter.
absolutely it is. Yeah.
So I don't understand why we don't have some type of anonymous thing if we're asked to be a mandatory reporter. So
Well, they do. I think the sheriff's department, or Blount County Sheriff's Department, has an anonymous tip line to where you can call in and make an anonymous report. But again, I think people are nervous to do that. They think that they can be traced and tracked. They think their calls can be traced and tracked, and whatnot. I do. I think
A lot of distrust going on there.
a whole lot of distrust happening out of our sheriff's department. Absolutely. Yeah.
man,
And just maybe even also being able to, for us as a community, to push consistent prosecution, be able to track plea deals and the outcomes. What did those look like? We have to actually go in and request, the paperwork, the court paperwork, in order to review plea deals and outcomes. But a lot of times when it comes to these sex offenses, they actually don't make it public or write down everything that's public when it comes to these plea deals and outcomes. And I also think those need to be public. I think we need to be able to know everything that happened as a community. I think we need to be able to know exactly what plea deal was made and why was that plea deal made. Because when we make plea deals with sex offenders, that gets them off the hook of so many things, and they just continuously go out and abuse these children. And I think that we need to do a better job. And that's one of the things I'm going to be speaking on at the library tomorrow. And I'm going to be focusing, hopefully hot and heavy on plea deals and the problem with plea deals, and what is it that we need to do in order to improve our system to where these sex offenders should not have plea deals. In my personal opinion, if I was ever in an elected position to where I could change laws, one of the things I would do, there would be a zero tolerance. Zero tolerance. It's not acceptable. There's no child's innocence that deserves an offender to be able to make a plea deal, in my opinion. You did it. You knew what you were doing. Now you need to be held accountable for it, and you will be.
right? Yeah, I agree. Yeah,
Yeah,
Yeah.
100%. I agree with you too on the public request. I've always thought that you should not have to go request that information and then fight back and forth with them, pay for it.
hmm
You should be able to go on a website and see anything that's been made public that's available without
Absolutely.
all of that.
Yeah,
I mean,
absolutely.
we kind of pay for that already, so to be charged again for it, I just find a lot of it insane.
Yeah, yeah, and you have to actually argue and fight back and forth. You know, trying to prove your right to be able to have access to this legal
Oh
documents
yeah,
in the DA's office, and it should not be that way. When it's that way, that tells me that they have something to hide.
right. Yep. And see, then when the local coverage doesn't help you either, so it's not coming out the way that it needs to be in the local newspapers or
yeah.
media or whatever it is. You know what I'm
Mhm.
saying? So, um, or if it does come out, it's too late because now they're trying to save face from not getting in front of something to begin with. Uh, yeah.
Yeah.
Cards are definitely stacked.
Oh, yeah.
So,
Absolutely.
and we get that everybody's innocent till proven guilty, but when
Yeah.
they're making these deals based on the fact that, like you said, they're trying to avoid sex registry and everything else like that. Well, then again, there's a red flag, and I don't. As a judge, I don't understand. I would have never gone for any of that. I think they can. Can't they make maximum penalties on certain things? I should probably
Mhm.
be careful. I don't want to have to go in front of a judge and go, "Hey, I heard you talk about maximum penalties."
Yeah,
Well, I think you asked a question. I mean, you didn't assume one.
Yeah.
It's safe to ask questions.
Yeah.
So I think so. I think when it comes to the decisions that judges can make, I believe that they have they have these
Discretion.
gray areas. It starts out with the very minimum all the way up to the most extensive law. Obviously, they just can't pass anything. They have guidelines they have to follow, and they're there for a reason. But what happens is that when these sex offenders come forward and they've made a plea deal with the prosecuting attorneys at the DA's office, then they ultimately have made a plea deal, but it's going to be on the lower end. Now, the problem with that is that when a sex offender makes a plea deal, you have to realize they've already probably committed hundreds of acts of crimes before they ever got caught. So when they're making a plea deal on this lower end, what ultimately ends up happening is that, like what we ended up seeing with one of our other local cases, the cases end up getting dissolved and dismissed, and you can't do that because these individuals will most likely have had hundreds of victims under their belt or hundreds of offenses within 20 or 30 or 40 victims under their belt. So we cannot be making plea deals with sex offenders. I understand constitutional rights, and I know, Brian, that you're really big on constitutional rights, and of course they're there for a reason. And,
Right. Yeah.
and I get that. But what they don't end up taking into consideration is that I look at some of these other cases, like I've been following the case to where the man had done horrific acts to that little girl with the FedEx driver, the FedEx van.
Oh yeah.
I've been following that case, and it's just, it's so devastating and it's sickening. I almost got sick to my stomach, and it is a horrible case. But yes, that case was made public for a reason. And the mother on the stand, she was able to talk about the impact that it had on her. One of the things that does not happen with sexual abuse victims when they make these plea deals, the victims don't get to make their victim statements. They don't get to have a voice about their own victimization. They don't get to talk about all the internal scars, the therapy, the years of therapy, the trauma I went with, et cetera, because actually you look like you've got yourself together, right?
Yeah.
They don't get to talk about the trauma and the internal scars that they carry with them. And so I think that every victim should be able to, regardless of what the deal has been made, have a victim impact statement before those deals are ever made. They should be able to sit, on the stand and make a public declaration as to what they think that sex offenders should be charged with, how this has affected them, all of their internal scars, etc. Because I remember when I spoke in front of the commissioners twice, not once, but twice, on the Dalton case. I spoke in front of the commissioners, and each time, the first time I was there, the news stations were there on both occasions, but the first time I was there, it was packed. There was like standing room only. I mean, it was just packed because people wanted to speak out about how the suffering of these victims, right? And there was even victims that actually spoke that are of age now. So as young adults, they spoke to the commission, and you could hear it in their voice. And as a fellow survivor, because that would have been one of my survivor sisters speaking on that, I can feel the pain. I can feel the emotional pain and the emotional trauma that these victims went through, and they were able to speak. But yet, they really didn't get to have justice in the end. So when we met up for the second time, and I don't remember those dates, the recordings are on my Frontline of Justice page for those dates. But the second time we were there and I spoke, the room was almost empty. No one was there. And the reason no one was there was because he got a plea deal and he got basically his wrist slapped.
Yep.
That was it.
Yeah.
And no victims spoke anymore. They went completely silent. And the reason they went silent was because they had lost hope and faith in their system.
So I've never looked at it from that perspective. I wondered why they didn't say anything. And then now when you're bringing the approach that way, then there's a different understanding there. So the system didn't help them.
They lost faith. Their system didn't help them. Their system did not protect them, and they were not there to even have a voice the second time the commission met on it because they gave up hope. Yeah. And that's a sad thing. And that's something that we're seeing here. So when we see it within our churches, within our schools, within our communities, etc., and they know that they're not going to get justice, why even report it anymore, right? So you see these victims lose hope. And that's what I'm trying to prevent. That's what I'm trying to change. Trying anyway.
To bring that hope back to some of them.
Yeah. Oh, and future victims. Because eventually these people will be back into the school systems. They will be back into some other system somewhere, and the cycle will continue.
Makes you wonder if maybe they should make not only a state registry better, but a national registry. Do they have that?
Well, we do have the National Sex Offender Registry is it's under the Sex Offender Registration and Notification Act, and so that's actually the federal registry, but which would be the national registry. And in the state of Tennessee, they are up to date with the most current, which is what we call a tier system of reporting. To whereas other states are actually still under the older system, and that's based on the Wetterling Act. So basically that's not the new tier system. That's actually the older system to where, say, a sex offender only has to check in, one time a year. They only have to, let them know. They'll call them and say, I'm living here. I'm actually working here, that sort of thing. And that way an officer can do a surprise call to make sure they are where they say they're supposed to be, et cetera. But what happens with that, even though the state of Tennessee is under the new tier system, the new tier reporting system, one of the things in the state of Tennessee, a law that needs to be changed under the Sex Offender Registration Act, is that in a state of Tennessee, someone can pitch a tent in someone's yard and be in that tent and make sure they sleep in that tent at nighttime. But they can use the address of the lawn, the yard that they have their tent pitched in, and that house, that address can have young children living there, etc. The law only says as long as they sleep in the tent at nighttime. Now let's just presume that the only time a sex offender is going to abuse a child is at nighttime, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, they actually allow that in the state of Tennessee, and there's nothing that law enforcement can do about it because they are within the guidelines. That has to change.
Right.
And one of the things with the new registration system is that there's only 18 states throughout the United States that's in compliance within the new registry system. All the other ones are still falling under the older categories, the older laws. So what we're now seeing is we're seeing a migration of sex offenders actually moving to those states that fall under the old system. For example, the state of North Carolina is under the old system. However, the Indian reservations are under the new system. So we'll see sex offenders relocating from, say, the state of Tennessee, crossing the state borders into North Carolina, and now living under their system because it's much more laxed.
It almost seems like it's set up to benefit them more than the victims.
Oh, it is. It really does. And we also have to remember that the sex offender registration system is only a notification system. It's a reporting system for the public to be aware that, yes, a sex offender lives the next street over from you. But the issue with that is that it places accountability on families to know where sex offender lives, where a sex offender lives, instead of law enforcement being on top of it like they need to be. Now, law enforcement officers they work really hard. They do. I train them. I see the struggles that they deal with. And they do try really hard to stay on top of these sex offenders. But the problem with that is that ultimately, they don't have enough investigators to stay on top of all of these sex offenders. One detective may have 300 offenders they're responsible for monitoring, and they cannot keep up with all the monitoring that needs to take place. So therefore, they have an extra burden on top of them to be able to really stay on top of it. And that's not the law enforcement officer's fault. That's the system's fault.
Right.
The system has to be changed. And that's one of the things that I'm tackling with changing the sex offender system as well.
Yeah.
Out needs some people separate just for that. That's the only thing they do.
Yeah, absolutely. And then what happens is that they get, they'll have 60 cases on their desk that they're supposed to investigate, but they also have to stay on top of all the registries, as the registrants as well as too. And it's just so much that they're basically overwhelmed. Yeah, absolutely. And they try their best. But imagine being a detective, and you've worked really hard on a case and you've collected all the evidence that's needed, but yet when the district attorney at the DA's office, they actually end up making a plea deal against a sex offender, and basically it falls through the cracks, and that sex offender is now back on the streets offending more children, et cetera. It happens all the time.
Huh.
Yeah.
That's amazing. When you don't think about it you obviously, again, bring the perspective that I never looked at it from before, so when I look at it that way, then because there's a part of me that wants to blame other things, and some of it doesn't fall on their hands based on the fact that some of their hands are hamstrung just by the legislation and the laws that are out there that
Absolutely.
that only allow them to go so far, but you're right. I like the Constitution. I believe in all that stuff. But when it comes to the children, I'm not saying that we need to divert from it, but we obviously need to make sure that if you are in a court case, there's got to be a way to do it without allowing a plea deal and not trampling on somebody's constitutional right at the same time, because it's a minor.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's so many caveats, right, to this problem. It's not just one resolution isn't going to solve all of our problems. We have to look at this systemically. Sex predators are always going to be there. They're not going away. So what we have to do is we have to break the silence of culture, right? We have to break this silence culture that we live in. We have to get rid of that. We have to normalize reporting. Even when it's uncomfortable, we have to normalize reporting. We have to separate community reputation from child safety. Basically, child safety should be paramount. It should be the most important thing that we have, right, that we focus on. We have to also support victims publicly and consistently. We cannot be laxed on this topic because silence protects offenders. It doesn't protect communities. It protects offenders. And we have to change our system in which we deal with this. And and I'm not just talking about our criminal justice system. We have to change our culture system, the system that we have in our cultures, our communities that continuously protect sex offenders. We have to break this silence. I can't scream it enough from the rooftops. And in rural areas, prevention isn't about, how do I say this? Prevention isn't about more systems. It's about strengthening the ones that we have.
Yeah.
And when we have communities, law enforcement, and prosecution, and they all come into alignment and they all start agreeing on how these sex offenders should be handled, that's when the real protection actually truly begins in our communities.
Agree with that 100%. Yep. Yeah. Yeah. So it's been an hour and 5 minutes, and we have all this tomorrow to talk about. So I wanted to ask you, is there a way you want to close it out? Because we get to do this again tomorrow.
You do? Oh, yeah. You're coming to the thing tomorrow.
Yeah.
Oh, well,
Oh yeah, we'll be there.
it's going to be a little bit different tomorrow. Yeah, we're definitely going to be a little bit different tomorrow. It's a little bit different setup. I didn't want to talk about everything I wanted to talk about tomorrow. I will say that. I didn't want to give it away. But I
Okay.
can't believe it's been an hour. I hadn't even paid attention.
Yeah.
I thought it was about 20 minutes.
No, we knew. Me and Robert, we talked about it before. You know,
Yeah.
these things go like they do on purpose. Because once you get talking, we just like, holy cow.
I
Because
know.
Yeah,
it all
time
comes in,
flies.
yep, and it all comes in together. I mean, you talk about it, the system breaking down in the institutions, in like the court systems, in all facets, obviously, and then at home as well. So, uh, just wild, and the fact that I never thought about some of these things the way that you approach it is different, which is probably the way that if I think about the way that I would like to handle it, there's a lot of people in the county that think about it the same way that I do, um, and you give us a different perspective that maybe uh, puts us back in a position to where we can do it preventatively, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So
Yeah.
okay,
Yeah. Prevention is key, but how can we focus on prevention if we don't already know how to prevent it? And there's so many caveats to this, right? I mean, do we focus on prevention when it comes to law enforcement? Do we focus on prevention when it comes to community services, like, I don't know, churches, schools, et cetera, right? Where is it that we focus on prevention? Because prevention is such an easy word, but it's so broad too, right? So I think we have to get very, very serious with how we're going to approach this and how we're going to focus on it. So tomorrow I'll talk more about plea deals, and I'll have it very well organized in a presentation style.
yep,
And then Jeff Coggin will come after me. And then after Jeff Coggin, Jerry Burns is going to speak on the law enforcement side of things. And then we're going to have like a 20-minute Q&A to where people can then ask all sorts of questions
Oh, that's awesome.
after seeing all of that, because that way we'll give them an opportunity to ask questions and meet people and do what it is that they need to do to have their questions and concerns answered. But in closing out this session, I guess if I had to say something, I want to stress again that offenders don't just exploit individuals; they exploit systems, and systems like community systems, community cultures, our education system, our criminal justice system, our religious system. They basically exploit all of these individuals within these systems. So they're exploiting the systems as well. So we have to target these systems. And when those systems fail to respond fully, the consequences don't stay in the past. They show up in future victims. And so that's what we have to talk about, and that's what we have to focus on, because the most abuse is hidden. Most abuse is secret. Most offenders are known. Most offenders are well known. And accountability basically is the difference between one victim and many victims. So,
I've got a screenshot of the event.
oh, okay.
I
If you want to
it
add
for
it.
whatever reason it won't let me share it. Can you do it?
Oh no, it won't let me add it.
What's going on? Let me see here. Try now.
Nope.
No, I have no clue why. It says you're a participant. It's calling Melissa a guest, and you all are supposed to be moderators. So
Oh,
I'm afraid if I refresh it, I'm going to kill us. But
yeah.
Mm.
we'll make sure
Yep.
that we share it when we get done. So because it's in
Yeah.
here, it just will not let me pop it up there on the screen.
Yeah,
So
I can see it down here.
yeah, I know. I've been trying to do it like 50 times, so it just keeps giving me the red circle with the line through it. So James, yes, it's at the library. It's from 1:30 to 3:30, and yeah, man, come out. You're gonna see us all out there. So
Yeah. I look forward to finally meeting you all in person. I think
I
it's going to be
know.
good. We'll have to get some
I
pictures.
do too.
Yep.
Yeah, I'm also going to be. I'm bringing my tripod, and I'm going to actually be recording our sessions too. I'm planning on doing that,
Okay.
so we can share it later as well.
Okay. All right. Well, Melissa, it's going to be awesome seeing you guys tomorrow. And
Thank you.
with that, I guess we'll say everybody have a good evening. We would prefer you like, share, and follow, and get the word out. And see you tomorrow at 1:30, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
1:30 tomorrow. I'll see you guys tomorrow, and thank you again for having me. I always appreciate it, and I always appreciate you helping me raise awareness on this very, very important topic.
Yes, ma'am.
We
No problem.
appreciate you too.
Thank you.
All right, bye.
All right, bye-bye.
See you.
Bye.
Yeah, it's not going to let me kick her either. So,
Oh no!
yeah, it's all on Brian. All right, I'm
So
just going
this
to
is
end.
just a
Look
this
at
is just
there.
an infinite show.
Now it did that. It kicked her. Or maybe she did it herself. I don't know.
Yeah, she may have kicked
Yeah.
herself.
This is what happens with technology. So, anyway,
That's the greatest.
it's the greatest. Yeah. All right, guy. I will see you tomorrow and probably be there a little early.
Yeah, I probably will be too.
All right, man. Talk to you tomorrow. I'm just going to end the stream since it won't let me do anything.
All right, we'll see
Later.
you guys out there.
Bye.